Hi, everyone. Um, well, it's a little bit past the hour, so we're going to get started. Welcome to the 2022 Guelph Organic Conference and Virtual Trade Show. Thank you for attending EcoScholars Spotlight, Biodiversity in Regeneratively Grazed Pastures and Increasing Organic Field Crop Phosphorus Uptake session. We would like to start by acknowledging that the sacred land where the Organic Council of Ontario and Guelph Organic Conference resides is situated upon the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Please take a moment to reflect on where you are situated and the history of the land you now occupy. We welcome you to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. We encourage you to learn the history of the land and you are in relationship with by visiting whoseland and nativeland.ca. Links to these sites have been shared in the chat. We invite everyone to introduce themselves in the session chat located on the right side of your webpage. Make sure your chat audience is set to everyone, or your message will just be sent to the panelists. There will be time to ask speakers questions after their presentation. There are two ways you can ask questions. You can write your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the presentation screen throughout the presentation, or use the raised hand button to indicate you would like to ask your question live during the Q&A portion of the session. We are so fortunate to have these presenters share their knowledge and experience with us, as well as the community of attendees that have joined this session. We ask that you please communicate respectfully with all session participants. OCO is the voice of organics in Ontario, a membership-based nonprofit association that represents the Ontario's organic sector. OCO is the only trade association working and advocating on behalf of the entire organic industry, from field to plate. OCO has a vision of a thriving local organic food system. Our membership includes all certified organic operators, but supporting members are a significant source of our revenue, and they also receive benefits. If you would like to work with us to create a strong local organic food system, consider becoming a member today. OCO's AGM is March 31st, and we are currently recruiting board members. Please see the chat for links to the nomination form. This year's conference theme was inspired by OCO's Organic Climate Solutions campaign, funded by the Government of Canada's Climate Action and Awareness Fund. We want to raise awareness of the environmental and economic benefits of organic and regenerative farming practices and the resources available to support farmers in taking up these practices. Use the link in the chat to explore the Organic Climate Solutions webpage. We would like to thank Thomas Nimmo for his 40+ years of commitment to the organic sector and his long-standing work with the Guelph Organic Conference, which has been an important meeting place for the sector over its many years of growth. But Thomas is still behind the scenes pulling strings. While OCO is hosting this year's conference in the virtual setting, the Guelph Organic Conference will continue as it has for years to come. The Guelph Organic Conference would not be possible without our sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. You will be able to connect with all of our sponsors in the exhibit hall of the conference website. And thank you to our Grow Level sponsors, EcoCert, and our Flourish Level sponsor, Fennings Organic Farms, ProCert Organic Systems, Canadian Organic Growers, the Prairie Organic Development Fund, and the Government of Canada. Lastly, we would like to offer a special thank you to this session's sponsor, Yorkshire Valley Farms. I would now like to invite James Sculthorpe to say a few words on behalf of Yorkshire Valley Farms.
Thank you. We're very excited to be here today. My name is James Sculthorpe. As noted, I'm the CEO of Yorkshire Valley Farms. For those of you that are unfamiliar with us, I just thought I'd give a quick summary, but we are a farmer-founded, mission-driven organic poultry company with very deep roots in Ontario. I think we've been members of OCO for probably over 10 years now. Since starting our business over 11 years ago, we've successfully grown our farm partners to extend to 24 organic broiler producers in the province, 6 turkey growers, and over 10 layers. Our products are currently sold across Canada and into select US and Asian markets. And while we see opportunity in non-domestic markets, we remain fiercely committed to the Canadian organic producers, farmers, and the whole supply chain. It's with that in mind and that reason and that rationale and those values that we as an organization have committed over $100,000 to support the Eco Scholarship Program over a 10-year period. We recognize we've been very fortunate, and we want to give back to a community that we want to continue to see future leader development as we grow our business. This community is very important to us and aligns with our purpose, which is on the screen here. Make food matter more. And we're really entrenching our business in that language. How do we make food matter more for the environment, for the stakeholders, the entire supply chain? I think we can all agree. I'm probably preaching to the converted, but organic sometimes is very difficult to explain to people because it means so many things. And so we just see so much value in organic and how it can honor so many parts of our communities. I would leave everyone today with a final challenge. Our program, as you've heard, continues to grow and has picked up some good scale, but we still can't source everything we need domestically. And I would put that challenge out there. And I know OCO and other organizations like OCO are continuing to try to build the supply chain, but we would love to be in a position several years from now where we can proudly say that we've been able to source everything we need for our program here domestically. And I think, frankly, our consumers would love to see that too. So I put that challenge out there. I thank you for including us in today's session. And sorry we're not doing it in person, because I'm sure there's lots of people on this call that I haven't seen in a while. But again, thank you. And thank you for everyone for making today happen.
Awesome. Thanks, James. I would now like to introduce session moderator, Christine Cooper. Christine is the Director of Corporate Strategies and Sustainability at Yorkshire Valley Farms. As part of her role, she is the lead on ESG initiatives, our corporate culture, community education and outreach, and creating links throughout the organic value chain from producer to consumer. Christine also sits on the board of the Organic Council of Ontario. I will now pass things over to Christine.
Hi, everyone. Really great to see so many people here this afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first EcoScholar Spotlight, and hopefully one of many, but we're really excited to be able to create this forum for the two presenters today to share their research with you. Both of our presenters today are EcoScholar winners from the 2021 program. And I think what they've got to share is really exciting in terms of what they're working on and what it can contribute to the community. If you're not familiar with the EcoScholar program, it actually started back in 2004, and it's taken a few different forms over the years, and including some periods of inactivity. But last year, Yorkshire Valley Farms partnered with the Guelph Organic Conference to expand the award. As you heard James say, we've committed to investing $100,000 over the next 10 years into this program. And so on an annual basis, there's $10,000 in funding, which is awarded to 4 recipients each year. Our goal is really to support the next generation of organic leaders and to build a really strong and resilient community. From a personal perspective, being involved in the EcoScholar program, getting to review those applications and hear from students has been an incredibly enlightening experience. The passion and ideas that are out there are so encouraging for the future of this organic community. And I hope that as you hear some of the ideas that Michelle and Kyra are going to share with us today, that you too will be inspired. I think there's a really strong future for us here, both in Ontario and across the country. And these EcoScholars are just representative of what is out there. So it is my pleasure to introduce Michelle and Kyra, who will be sharing their current research projects. The flow of the session today is going to be that Michelle will present first, and then we'll do a short Q&A specific to her presentation, and then we'll invite Kyra to come up and present her work, and we'll do a second Q&A forum there to ask questions about her research. And so let's dive in. Today's first presenter is Michelle Carkner, who is currently working towards her PhD at the University of Manitoba. Michelle actually started her career as a chef here in Ontario. And through her conversations with the farmers who were delivering to the restaurants, she became interested in agriculture, and that ultimately led to a career shift. She went on to earn a Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph, and then a master's degree from the University of Manitoba. As part of that, she was involved in coordinating the nationwide Canadian Organic Participatory Plant Breeding Program, or the PPB, which was dealing with wheat, oat, potatoes, and working with farmers, breeders, and researchers from PEI to BC. So in her current PhD work, she is looking at phosphorus dynamics in farmer-selected organic wheat lines from the PPB program. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to share more about that work.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending this session. I will quickly share my screen. Mhm. There we go. Before I start my presentation, I wanted to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. And we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And I also wanted to thank Yorkshire Valley Farms for helping to support this research. So I'll get started right into it. So my presentation is the impact of on-farm selection environment on phosphorus capture in organic wheat. So this is the presentation outline. I'll give a bit of a background on the project, the importance of phosphorus in our agroecosystems, how plants respond to low phosphorus environments and how we can measure efficiency, the genetic material that I am using within this project. Kristen talked a little bit about it, but it is from the PPP program, but I'll go into more detail of what that means. Then we'll move into the actual research project, the experimental design overview, some agronomic and phosphorus use efficiency preliminary results, a little bit of discussion, and then some future work. So phosphorus in organic ecosystems is a bit of a perfect storm of too much and too little. And depending where you are in Canada, this is, in prairies, we have too little a lot of times, and then maybe in Southern Ontario, where we have a lot of animal agriculture close to farms, we have too much. So on the prairies, we have a lot of times in organic farms, we have too little. This is a problem because phosphorus is an essential macronutrient for crops. It's an essential part of ATP, which is the fuel for that drives production. It's also an essential part of DNA and cells. And yeah, many organic farms across Canada are very low in phosphorus because they do not have access to manure to spread out over the just a sheer amount of acres that organic farmers have on the prairies. And then a lot of times you can have too much. And so phosphorus runoff from farms can become a major pollutant to water bodies through eutrophication and can become quite toxic to organisms. So in the bottom right corner here, I have Lake 226 from the experimental lake area in Ontario, and that really dark green color is just the amount of algae that's in the water system. And essentially when the algae dies, it sucks all of the oxygen out of the lakes and can kill the organisms within that lake. So we have to be very mindful of how we use phosphorus. And on top of that, like outside of manure, I know a lot of organic farmers are familiar with rock phosphate, and that's also sourced from non-renewable resources. And it's also geographically restricted. We don't have a domestic supply of phosphorus on large amounts. So we import a lot from other countries. And also it's well known that rock phosphate is poorly taken up by plants. So how can we possibly function our agroecosystems on maybe a smaller amount of phosphorus required on our farms? One way is to decrease phosphorus requirements through breeding. So a bit about the soil phosphorus cycle. We're going to go a little bit into soil science here. I promise I won't make it too painful, but hopefully as organic farmers, we all really enjoy it anyway. So the soil phosphorus cycle is extremely dynamic, and all the processes are dependent on soil moisture, soil type, and even tillage. So this inorganic P fraction in the blue is phosphorus that's bound to minerals. We have a lot of phosphorus in our soils, but in a lot of ways they are not available to plants directly. And then we have the organic P fraction, which is phosphorus that's bound to carbon. So yeah, neither of these fractions are phosphorus in a form of phosphorus that the plants can actively take up. The phosphorus has to be in an anion form. So this is the soil solution phosphorus. So for example, when you apply manure, a certain portion of the manure is in the anion form, and it can be either taken up by plants or it can be taken up by the microbes that live within the soil. And then it can also be bound by iron, aluminum, or calcium complexes, or yes, become part of the organic phosphorus pool. Another way to look at this, these different pools, is how available they are to the actual soil solution pool on the right side. And we're going to talk the most about the soil solution pool because that is the form that plants take phosphorus up out of the soil. So stabilized organic matter in this way that is protected against degradation, it can often move into the fixed P pool. The active P pool moves into the soil solution pool once the soil solution pool is depleted due to microbial plant uptake. So you have this constant flux between moving in and out of the soil solution P pool depending on how much phosphorus is taken up by the plant. And the forms of phosphorus in the organic phosphorus pool is often the form of these stable ring structures within microorganisms. And the organic phosphorus pool can make up as much as 30 to 80% in soils. So why does this pertain to organic farms? Well, a lot of times organic farms are functioning under low phosphorus or under soils that have a higher organic phosphorus pool than maybe conventional farms. So how do plants overcome this? Well, plants can do two different things. They can take on a role of soil exploration because phosphorus is quite immobile in the soil. So they can actually change their root morphology. Here's an example of a common bean roots here. So they might change their root morphology, change the angles of their roots so that they're more topsoil foraging, or they might make associations with arbusco mycorrhizae fungi, which is essentially a fungi that infects the root. And these hyphae that the fungi send out can explore more surface area of the soil than an actual root hair. And so the hyphae actually can take up phosphorus in their hyphal networks, move phosphorus into the plant, and then the plant gives carbon to the fungus. Another way that plants can deal with low phosphorus conditions, low available phosphorus conditions, is actually to exude organic anions and extracellular enzymes. So in this way, they're interacting with the organic phosphorus pool and the fixed phosphorus pool, because they can actually break the bonds of those ring structures and make phosphorus more available. So crops grown under organic conditions or low phosphorus conditions must place energy into a more biologically mediated nutrient supply or place energy into accessing phosphorus that is not readily available like conventional cropping systems can. So how do we measure this in research? Well, we measure this by looking at the relative phosphorus uptake efficiency. So we want to look at the ratio of phosphorus taken up per the amount of phosphorus that's there. We can look at the phosphorus utilization efficiency, so how the plant actually uses phosphorus within its structure. So we can look at how much phosphorus moves from the biomass, the stems, into the grain at the reproductive stages. And then we can combine this together and look at phosphorus use efficiency as a whole. So that's multiplying together the phosphorus uptake and utilization efficiency. And we'll get more into that once we talk about the results. So switching gears into the organic participatory wheat breeding program, because this is kind of the underlying feature of my research. This program was started in 2011 in Manitoba, and then it was expanded Canada-wide with increased funding from Seed Change Canada and the federal government. So essentially, each farmer is provided with 3 F3 generation populations. And what this means is they get a very early generation cross, and all of these plants are very genetically distinct. They select 300 spikes from this plot that they plant on their own farm. They send it back to the University of Manitoba. We cleaned it and sent the seed back again, and they repeated this 3 times. So then they ended up with a generally homogeneous population. So this is just an overview of the differences between the PPB program and a normal breeding program. In a normal breeding program, all of the crosses and the lines tested and selected by a breeder are done on a research station, whereas in a PPB program, even the parents in this program were helped selected by organic farmers. The seeds were planted on organic farms once they were increased, They were selected by the farmer, and then the trials to assess the agronomic performance were done on farm and in research stations. And then at the end of the day, the farmers have a locally adapted population that's specific to their farm and their conditions. And like Kristen mentioned, we worked in wheat, oats, and potato, but today we're going to talk about wheat. And then these are just the locations of the farms that we've worked with over the years. We've completed 68 wheat populations. We've had 22 farmers participate. So tying this all together, I talked a lot about phosphorus and dynamics within the soil and the PPP program. Well, I'm going to talk about the importance of selection environment. It is very well understood that the selection environment impacts the final production performance. And this has become a little bit of the underpinning of wanting an organic breeding program in Canada. The selection environment is recognized in the greater scientific community because we have regional breeding programs. We have Western and Eastern wheat spring breeding programs. We don't have one breeding program for all of Canada. It's also underpinned by research that's been done here in Manitoba, where lines that were bred under organic conditions were then tested under conventional versus organic, and the organic lines consistently did better under organic conditions than in conventional conditions. And also there's some research, international research looking at breeding durum wheat lines under zero-till versus conventional till, and the early vigor of zero-till selected lines were consistently higher in all environments, mainly because, in zero-till in the spring, the soil is much colder than in conventional till. So selection environment matters. So tying this all together into my hypothesis, we need crops that function under low phosphorus conditions, so that farms can perform optimally and we can reduce our runoff potential. Plants bred under low phosphorus or manure supplied systems by farmers, we have that genetics, and we know that there is an impact for selection environment. So my hypothesis for this research is that by selecting under organic production systems, farmers will breed lines that will utilize phosphorus more efficiently and access greater organic pools of phosphorus than their parents under organic conditions. So this is the experimental design. Essentially what I did was I took the parents. So this is red fife is one parent, which is a landrace. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. 5602HR, which is a modern variety that's known for very high protein and disease resistance. And we sent the diverse populations off to 2 farmers, one in Agassiz, BC in the Fraser Valley, and one in Carman, Manitoba. And they planted the lines on their farms and they selected from on their farms. The research was conducted, it will be conducted over 3 years in Lebo, Manitoba, which is about 40 minutes northeast of Winnipeg. The soil phosphorus was very low, about 3 ppm LSMP, and the previous crop was a cover crop mixture. We had very little weed pressure, and I tested 2 factors. So I took all of the genotypes and put manure on some plots and had no manure on other plots. So we wanted to compare how these genotypes responded to manure or having very low phosphorus. So this is just an illustration of what I did here. So you have your parents, and then you have your farmer lines, and we've treated them as treatments, and then they're randomized across a field like this. So I'm going to give you an idea of what 2020 and 2021 seasons were through yield. In general, 2020, we did better in 2020 than in 2021, but we still did fairly poor. In 2020, it was dry and hot. And in 2021, it was very dry and very hot. I don't know if you've heard anything about last year with the drought in Manitoba on the prairies, but my study site was right smack dab in the middle of that. We had 48% of normal precipitation. And I just wanted to highlight that in 2020, we have a manure site interaction, which means that the genotypes responded more to the manure in 2020 than in 2021. And I suspect this is because we did not have good rainfall, which means the manure didn't mineralize. And also we had very poor performance. So just keep that in mind that 2020 was a drier and 2021 was a drought year, and this will impact what we see. So I want to talk a little bit about the farmer lines, because I think this is interesting to all organic farmers, regardless if we are concerned about phosphorus. This is really interesting stuff. So you can see here that here's the 5602HR, which is the modern line, red fife, which is a landrace. You can see that the farmers actually shifted their own populations to mirror more of red fife than 5602HR, which means that farmers, for whatever reason, I don't think, because I've spoken to both of them and neither of them intentionally selected for lines that were taller. They just selected plants that looked the best to them. They selected for lines that were taller. So that means that organic farmers are currently growing spring wheat lines that are might be too short for their system, whether that be for weed competitiveness or early vigor. Organic farmers seem to be selecting for populations that are taller. And this was consistent whether it was in manure, non-manure, 2020 or 2021. Another interesting thing here is I'll bring your attention up to 2020, is that the farmer lines in some cases, so this is the blue is with phosphorus and the orange is without phosphorus. And in a lot of cases, the farmers were selecting for seeds that were quite much larger than the 5602HR parent. So somehow the farmers were intentionally trying to select for seeds that were larger within their whole population. And PWA 00KB was consistently had the largest seed size regardless of manure treatment. And that farmer asked what they were selecting for, and seed size seemed to be one that they were actually selecting for. The literature does say that the larger the seed size, the more vigorous that plants are. So that might have something to do with why they selected that. Those plants might have just been much more vigorous earlier in the season, and that might be connected to seed size. Another measurement that we did was test weight. So this is seed density. This is pertaining to quality aspects. And you can see here that PWA 00KB, this is 2020 and 2021 combined, that he selected for lines that for plants that created a denser seed than both parents, which is really interesting because you can't necessarily select for that when you're selecting plants in the field, but under organic conditions, this person was able to shift the population more to seeds that were denser than what they started out with. And then for protein, which I found was really interesting, it's not surprising that 5602HR was one of the higher protein lines. But if you remember that the yields were not really different from each other, so in this way, the farmers were able to maintain the yields under stressful conditions compared to the parents, and a modern cultivar was also able to increase the protein than over one parent. So red fife is kind of known to have a lower protein, but these farmers were able to shift the population to have a higher protein under organic conditions, which I thought was really interesting. Now moving into phosphorus. So I'll move kind of a little slowly through these graphs because I know it's a lot of bars and stuff, but essentially just to remind you, this is the phosphorus uptake efficiency. So this is how much was the plant able to take up into its biomass given what phosphorus was there. So this is a combination of soil phosphorus and the manure and the phosphorus that was added through manure. So I'm going to bring your attention over to this quadrant, which is 2020, and I'm calling it dry conditions. You can see that under manure, 5602HR did a little bit did better than the progeny, than the children. The 5602HR seemed to respond more to added nutrition than the children, and red fife was variable. Whereas under low phosphorus conditions, under stressful conditions, the farmer lines were able to take up more phosphorus than 5602HR. So there's something going on there. And I wanted to show the phosphorus uptake efficiency in drought years, just to compare to the difference of the ability for the lines to take up phosphorus under drought conditions. So you can see here the numbers here are quite a bit smaller than they are in 2020. So this is the phosphorus utilization efficiency. This is just a reminder that this is how well the plant was able to take the phosphorus in the biomass and move it into the grain at the reproductive stage. And you can see that under dry conditions and the manure treatments, and 5602HR transferred a lot of the phosphorus that it had bound up in the vacuoles of the biomass and push it into the grain, whereas the farmer lines didn't put as much energy into doing that. And then in the low phosphorus conditions, the KB line did a little bit better than the majority of the other ones, which is interesting. And then under drought conditions, red fife didn't do as well as the other lines. And then under drought low P conditions, there doesn't seem to be a general pattern there. So combining it all together, this is the utilization and the uptake combined together to give you a broad overview of how well these lines contributed the supplied soil P into the yield under organic conditions. If under the phosphorus plus phosphorus conditions, 5602HR transferred a lot of the phosphorus that it took up into the grain, and the farmer lines did not do as well. Whereas under low phosphorus conditions, the farmer lines did a lot better than the modern cultivar. And then this is just, I just showed this so that it gives you a snapshot of under drought conditions. There wasn't seem to be a pattern here. I think all of the lines in that year were just like super stressed out. So we didn't see a big difference there. So why do we care? Was phosphorus use efficiency driving yield? Well, yes and no. In 2020, you can see that there was a positive, this means there was a positive relationship between yield and phosphorus use efficiency. So that means that the more efficient the lines were, it seems to be highly correlated with higher yield. Whereas when the manure was added, it didn't really matter how efficient the plants were with the phosphorus that it had. The yield didn't really seem to be connected to how efficient the plant was at taking up phosphorus and using it. Whereas in the very, very stressful year, there was a positive correlation between yield and phosphorus use efficiency, whether there was manure and non-manure. And my guessing is that because the plants were so stressed out and the manure didn't mineralize very well, that the plants were acting as if there was no manure there. And so the use of the phosphorus that they were able to get when they could get it had a big impact on yield. So a little bit of discussion on the final general performance. It was really difficult to capture differences between cultivars in biomass because, for example, because there was poor mineralization in 2021, it was very dry drought conditions. And a lot of times in genotypic studies, when you're comparing cultivars, if you have very low yields, it's really hard to see differences because the genetic potential is not being expressed. Farmers were able to maintain yield of parental lines under very stressful organic conditions, and they were selecting for plants that were generally taller than modern cultivars, which we've seen in research that we've done in the past. And farmers were able to select for lines that had higher protein, greater seed size, and density over one parent or both parents. Moving into some phosphorus, we didn't really see too many statistically significant cultivar differences between treatments and efficiency, but we did see some anecdotal results that I talked about. But in low phosphorus conditions, farmers seem to take up more phosphorus than the modern parents, and they seem to be more efficient under low phosphorus conditions. And the modern cultivar responds more to added nutrients than farmer lines, which is what breeding programs generally want to see. They want to see added nitrogen through chemical fertilizers. They want to see a higher yield. They want to see that response. So it's not really surprising. And so far, efficiency and uptake are more related to environmental conditions in my study, more so than the actual genetic differences and selection environment. But hopefully 2022 will be a much wetter year. We've already gotten more snowfall than we have all of last winter. So hopefully next year will be better because a lot of other people in the literature have seen genetic differences between different crops. And one question I would like to leave you with is that to ponder is that the majority of phosphorus use efficiency calculations are derived from nitrogen use efficiency, but is it appropriate? Greater grain nitrogen is desirable because it increases the protein of the seed. However, greater grain phosphorus is not beneficial for marketability or nutrition. And so this calculation of P utilization efficiency, where you're looking at the translocation of the phosphorus from the biomass into the grain, it's not really connected to yield. I didn't see it in my study, and I haven't seen it in other pieces of work. And so this might be an opportunity to examine cultivars that have this lower phosphorus utilization efficiency and high yield. It might be useful for those traits to be combined for organic conditions, because if we can keep more phosphorus on the field, then this would be helpful. However, I know that plants that might have lower phosphorus, or seeds that have lower phosphorus, might not be as vigorous at the early stages. So I'd like to do some greenhouse studies to test that hypothesis, because that might be a breeding goal for organic conditions. So my future plans, I'm going to analyze roots for AMF abundance. I have those roots in the fridge. And we're also analyzing the rhizosphere soil for extracellular enzyme abundance, being able to break down those ring structures and to make phosphorus more available under low phosphorus conditions. I'd also like to do some greenhouse work looking at root biomass and architecture, and I hope to have a really great 2022 field season. And with that, I'd like to thank my advisor, Dr. Martin Entz, and my committee members, all of the technical support that's involved with this research, and my funding partners for making this research work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a lot, but it's also really fascinating. We're going to open it up to questions here. I see there's a couple questions that have been posted in the chat, and a couple of questions that are popping up here in the Q&A. So I will do my best to get to them, but hang tight and we'll try and get everyone's question in. So one of the first questions that I saw posted was from Thea. And Thea, if you wanted to be unmute, so you could ask your question, but you were asking a question about whether or not there was an analysis of the manure in the study.
Yeah, so the manure application rate, kilograms of phosphorus per hectare, was based on the analysis of the manure. It was composted manure that we got from a local organic farm, composted beef manure. And so all of those calculations were based on the moisture content of the compost and the phosphorus content of the compost. So yeah, it was based on kilograms of phosphorus per hectare and not necessarily the just weight of compost or per se. I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, we did do analysis.
We'll move to another question and then see if there's more to that. Feel to throw it in the chat and we can kind of come back to it. I see a question here from Rob Waldridge asking, would taller height above ground correlate with larger or longer root systems underground, meeting greater potential to access or uptake the soil nutrients?
Yeah, possibly. A lot of times you can calculate the biomass of the plant and connect it to the biomass of the roots. However, a lot of the modern cultivars, and this is like all of the cultivars that have the dwarf gene in them, they actually have been able to maintain the amount of biomass, but at a shorter stature. So the straw is a lot thicker than older cultivars, but they are shorter. So I don't think it's necessarily biomass itself and height are tightly correlated in modern cultivars, just because lately in the past like 30 years, breeders have been putting a lot of effort into making them shorter, but also maintaining the amount of biomass there, because that will impact your final yield.
Okay. And we've got a question here from Ralph Martin. Would you recommend a mixed population of farmer lines and one or both of the parents to optimize yield and protein depending on weather?
Hi, Ralph. Yeah, so that was, I didn't mention it, but I did include the F3s and a physical mixture of the parents, and he caught that. And I didn't mention it because it's actually to answer a lot of another hypothesis in that experiment. Oftentimes we have like 3 or 4 hypotheses per experiment. And so far, at least in low phosphorus conditions, at least in this experiment, we did not see an advantage of doing a physical mixture of the parents. Sometimes we saw an advantage of the actual F3s, possibly because it was so diverse. But I know that a lot of farmers are mixing cultivars in order to reduce risk in very stressful seasons. So, I mean, diversity lends stability. So I would never tell a farmer not to do it. I think it's a great idea to mix your cultivars if you can sell it as such.
We've got another question here coming in. What is the advantages for the plant of adding phosphorus from natural resources rather than synthetic fertilizers?
So the advantage for the plant would be that you are adding, you're contributing to the overall organic matter of your soil. You're contributing to the overall microbial activity of your soil. So I would say that a lot of times farms that have higher organic matter in very dry years, they're able to have a greater water holding capacity. So that's good for your plant itself. I would say the actual plant, the nutrition, I don't know if there's a specific benefit to the actual nutrition of the plant because the plant takes up phosphorus in that anion form. And it stores the phosphorus in that anion form in its biomass. And so I wouldn't say that there is a great advantage of adding manure to the plant's nutrition itself, but there is an added benefit of adding manure to your whole system and to your soil, which then benefits your plants. So that's actually one of my overall hypothesis is that plants that were bred under these conditions, they actually have mechanisms to access that organic phosphorus fraction because of that manure that's added. They're able to break down those ring structures within that organic phosphorus fractions over conventional, because conventional lines have been selected under environments that have only ever had monoammonium phosphate added. So they don't have to interact with those ring structures nearly as much.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions that have come in the Q&A, and Sam from OCO, keep us on time here. Let me know when we need to make sure that we move on, because I want to try and answer as many questions as we can. We've got one here from Andrew Hammermeister asking, how do you think intercropping or growing wheat with an underseeded cover crop would affect phosphorus use efficiency?
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept, and I actually haven't thought about it that much. So thank you. I don't know. I think that legumes seem to be really good at getting phosphorus from the soil. I know, like, when I did my organic soybean research, that a lot of times you didn't see a phosphorus deficiency, even if it was in low phosphorus conditions. And it's just because legumes are really good at getting phosphorus, unless it's like really, really low phosphorus. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't read the literature on that, but I'm going to write that down. Thank you, Andrew.
And we've got another question here from Carolyn Young. I'm curious if there is any consideration of different tillage events in the breeding program, given the role of mycorrhizae in phosphorus uptake.
Yeah, I did not take, well, I know the 2 farmers that of these lines, and I know that both of them do disking in the spring, and then after harvest, they usually do two or 3 cultivations before the end of the season. So yeah, I am not sure. but the roots that I sampled from were from our research station in Lebo, and we do like a disking, depending on how wet it is and depending the size of clods, and I'm sure all of you know, the amount of cultivation that we do, it really depends on the conditions. So yeah, I can't answer that for you, but I'm more interested in how the genotypes compare to each other rather than questioning the tillage treatments. But it is known that the more tillage you do, the more hyphal, you're breaking up those hyphal networks and reducing the amount of mycorrhizae in your soil. So I do recognize that.
Okay, we're going to do one last question, and then we're going to move on to Kyra. So Kyra heads up here. And the last question we've got for you here, Michelle, is how can you test for phosphorus in the soil?
So we did a just a normal soil soil test. So we have an auger, and we took a soil test and we sent it off to our labs in North Dakota. We use Eggvise laboratories, and they give us like an Olsen P. So that's how much phosphorus is readily available in the soil, given the pH of our soil. I think in Ontario, you'd also be worried about Olsen P. And then we also took another soil sample at anthesis when the plants were flowering, and the manure treated plots, we actually were able to increase the TPM to about 8 ppm. So I know that the manure was mineralizing, but yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but we just took a soil sample test and sent it off to a lab.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. A lot to take in, but also I think a lot of really interesting stuff coming out here, and curious to kind of continue to follow your research and see what learnings with all the, the plans that you've got. We'll do a little 2022 rain dance for you as well.
Thank you.
For your 2022 season. So our second presenter today is also an EcoScholar winner from our 2021 program. And I'd like to introduce Kyra Lightburn here, who's going to be presenting next. And so similarly, after their presentation, we will do a Q&A session, so you can put your questions in the chat or hang on to them to the end. Kyra comes from a family of devoted gardeners on Vancouver Island, BC. And after 13 seasons of tree planting in the coastal mountains of BC and Alberta, their interest in protecting biodiversity and natural systems was ignited, which led to an academic career that has taken Kyra through a Bachelor of Arts degree at McGill, a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture through the Organic Agriculture program at the University of Guelph. Kyra has received the prestigious Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarship and has also had the opportunity to teach at the University of Guelph. In their current research, Kyra is completing a PhD at Guelph University, researching how rotationally grazed pasture land management impacts native pollinator communities, and that is what they will be sharing with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyra to tell us more about that pollinator research.
Thank you so much. I'll just open my file here. You have to bear with me. I always have a million things open. My presentation is interactive, so I will ask people to type in their answers into the chat as we go through. Just give me a second while I... Okay, so thank you for welcoming here to talk about bee biodiversity in pastureland systems. And thank you very much to Yorkshire Valley Farm for the support in my research. I'm just going to get into it because you did such a good job of the introduction. I just want to give a land acknowledgement too, which is Guelph is on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron people and the treaty and territory of Mississaugas of the Credits. And I want to express recognition and gratitude for the sustainable maintenance of the land of this area, which occurred over millennia by these nations, and for the relationships and knowledge which continue to benefit our livelihoods in very diverse ways. I am, and I believe that my university is committed to continuing reconciliation in all that we do. So thank you very much. So just a quick outline of what I'll go through is I want to talk about bee diversity and do a little bee intro game, which is where I'm really going to ask you guys to be involved. Then I will talk about bee importance, and then we'll talk about grassland habitats for bees. And finally, I'll talk about my research and my predictions. Okay, so there's 20,000 species of bee in the world, and there's 856 species native to Canada and 400 species native to Ontario. So on this slide in the top left, we have Agapostemon, and then in the white square, you're looking from left to right at Dialectus, Pepinapis, which is the squash bee, and Perdita. And all these bees are bees that I find in grasslands. So this is the game I'd like to play. Now, I'm wondering if I can't actually see the chat right now. I wonder if Kristen could call out or read out any answers that I get in the chat from this game. I don't know if you can mention if you're able to do that for me.
I can do that. I can be the voice of the answers.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so bee or not to bee, and I'm going to put up a picture of a bee, fly, or a wasp, and I would like to get some guesses about whether it's a bee, a fly, or a wasp. Okay, so the first one's not too difficult, so I expect everybody to get this. But yeah, bee, fly, or wasp. And if anybody knows the name of this bee, then extra points.
We're getting lots of bees in the chat. There's also a suggestion you can pop your hand up so we can maybe do it like a quiz style. If you think this is a bee, raise your hand. You can use the raise hand feature.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're right. So this is the most common bumblebee in Ontario, Bombus impatiens, or the common eastern bumblebee. So we got a little bee to signify that. Okay, bee, fly, or wasp. This is pretty common too, so I still expect a fair amount of people to get this one. How about anybody voting for bee?
We're getting some wasps, some fly votes.
Okay, so how about, yeah, so fly, if anybody want to raise your hand for a fly. Yep, yep. And any wasps?
A few wasps in the chat, but I'd say we're
Okay.
more flies than wasps.
Yeah, so this is actually a fly. It's a hoverfly. And one of the ways that I can tell when I'm looking at bees, flies, and wasps is I do look for red eyes. Not all flies have red eyes, but it can be a pretty big indicator. And this is pretty common. You'll see them, especially if you have a garden and you look at some of your little flowers, you'll see these pretty regularly. So that's my fly. Okay, bee, fly, or wasp? How about we put anybody thinks it's a bee? Raise your hand quickly. Okay, give it a couple more seconds. Okay, how about flies? Got any flies? Okay. How about any wasps? Oh yeah, we've got some bee knowledgeable people here, or like insect knowledgeable people here. So this is actually a wasp. This is a cuckoo wasp. And I do find a lot of that in my samples, but I'm not doing work on wasp specifically, but it is maybe potentially something I could look at later, but not at this time. So there's my wasp. Okay, so when we're talking about the distinction, I think that sometimes people talk about bees having hair, and sometimes wasps also have hair, so that's not really a good indicator. Sometimes people will say, well, bees pollinate. Well, sometimes wasps pollinate, including the cuckoo wasp that I showed earlier. And I think generally, wasps get a bad rap, but the big basic indicator between them has to do with what they eat. So our bees are 100% vegetarian. They live off floral pollen and nectar, whereas the wasps eat animal protein, sorry. Okay, so bee, fly, or wasp? Let's go for the bee. Anybody raise your hand for a bee? Okay, we got quite a few bees there. Okay, how about a fly? Any flies? Oh yeah, a few people with fly. How about wasps? Any wasps?
Kind of split. You're kind of getting like fairly even votes.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, this is actually a robber fly. So it's a bee mimic, but it is a fly. And these are quite common. I actually took a picture of one, not this picture. This is professional shot because it makes it more clear, but I took a picture of one in Exhibition Park in Guelph here last summer. So they are around. Fly. And how about this last one? Bees, flies, or wasps? And I'll give you a hint, they're all bees or flies or wasps. So how many do we have for bees? Okay. How about flies? No flies? Doesn't look like any flies. Okay, how about wasps? Oh yeah, so this group is in line with what I thought too, and this created some trouble for me when I started my research project because I thought they're wasps, but they're all bees. So what we have in the top left is Sphacodes. It's called the blood bees. At the bottom, it's actually the wool carder bee, and then on the right is Nomada, and Nomada is the one that really gave me a run around. So I was putting them in the wasp pile for a very long time, and I had to go right back and redo that so that they are all bees. So that's just a little introduction to the diversity of bees that we find in Ontario. Okay, so why do we care about bee diversity? And I think everybody in this room probably knows, but the USDA put this together and it's showing the amount of pollination benefit these crops get from insects or animals. And I just used it because it's a nice graph and it shows some crops that we have here too. So apples obviously require a lot of pollination, blueberries, peaches, but even something like soybeans gets a 5% boost in pollination. And when you look at its pollinators aren't just good for crops, they're also really good for plant diversity on the whole. So this was a study of all plant diversity in different temperate zones or temperature zones or ecozones. And across the board, when they averaged it all out, it was 87.5% of plant diversity requires some form of animal pollination. So that's really significant. And wild pollinators are also important. We use honeybees a lot for like acute pollination needs, and that's very important, but wild pollinators can do things sometimes more efficiently, and they tend to have adapted with a lot of crops, so they actually pollinate a broader spectrum of crops. So this research was looking at crops, various crops across the globe, and they were looking at how much increase in fruit set they would get from the crop with an additional number of bees. And so the higher the line, or the higher the dot, sorry, the more that ratio was greater. So the more efficient the bees. So what they really found here was that across all the crops, wild bees pollinated more than the honeybees, and you got a greater efficiency on each additional bee that was added to the system for many of the crops. So that's why you have the pink dots a little bit above the green dots in this graph. And bees have multiple habitat requirements. I'll try and go through this quickly. We know a lot about floral resources. I think that's the pairing that comes to mind immediately, but not all flowers are created equal. And so we really need to look at, what flowers we want to put in our system and what resources do they provide to what species. We've also got important aspects of nest site and materials. So bees can be soil nesters, grass nesters, tunnel nesters, cavity nesters. Yeah, they can really nest in anything, but like specific to different species. So that's important to think about when we're thinking about our agricultural systems. Water resources are key. Bees can get water from ponds, puddles, streams, lakes, guttation drops, and from dew. Landscape connectivity is also important. Now that's important because when we have isolated populations of bees, we really lose genetic strength, and we also lose the ability for some of those bees to travel between places that have different resources. And finally, proximity to natural areas turns out to be very, very important. And that's because the natural borders of farms or other areas provide key resources for nesting habitat. And also it enables individual like the influx of new genetic material from communities, or like the exchange of genetic material from communities in those denser areas to less dense areas like farms, like in farm field. Okay, so just a little picture of some nesting habitat. So this will come up again when we're talking about cattle, because cattle can trample soil nesters potentially, but also they can kind of graze the grass down, enabling some of that soil to be there for bees to nest in. So pastures and grasslands are good for bees and pollination. And this research comes from Lacrete, Ontario. And what they were looking at is the number of bees within a canola field based on how much proportion of grassland was in the outside or around that field. So they categorized those canola fields into high proportion of grassland or pasture lands or low proportion of pasture lands. And then they tested how many bees they found in the fields. And for both bumblebees and other wild bees, they found there were significantly more bees in the fields, in the canola fields, where there was pastures, larger amounts of pastures around those fields, which I think is very important work and something we should know about. And of course, we have a lot of loss of grassland in Canada and in the globe, across the globe actually. And Ontario has lost almost 97% of its native grasslands. So that led me to think, you know, I really want to study where bees do well. And I want to study, like, I want to see, you know, what's going on with bees in pastures, because we know we've lost a lot of the native grasslands and there's important action to restore some of those spaces. But I want to know what's also going on in these productive grasslands that we have in Ontario. So I decided to study the effects of grassland management on wild bees in rotationally grazed pastures in Southern Ontario. And I specifically decided to look at management in terms of organic and non-organic management, grazing and grazing intensity, sward management. So that's like what's flowering in the sward, and the proximity and density of honeybees. That came along as sort of a byproduct of just not being able to find all my farm sites without honeybees, but it asks important questions about the impact of honeybees on native honeybee or native bees, sorry. And also I wanted to look at the surrounding landscape. So is there natural land around the farm? Is there a lot of organic land there, or is it quite an island? Is it urban land? And these kinds of factors, and see how they influence bee and floral abundance, diversity, and community structure in this area. Okay, so I was interested in rotationally grazed pastures because of the rest and recovery periods. And that's because we hypothesize it avoids overutilization of any given area, and it allows areas of flowering to be active at any time because it stimulates regrowth and reflowering, which is our bee food. So this is a little bird's eye view of a segment of a farm field. So this is only 3 paddocks, but this is basically what I went in to study. So in the center paddock, that's what hypothetically would be being grazed. Sometimes it wasn't quite as perfect as this with like A, B, C right next to each other. Sometimes currently being grazed was over here, and yesterday's grazing was like over there on the field. But I went into around where the cattle had been grazing most recently, or like within 1 to 3 days before, and I did testing on both the bees as well as the floral communities and biomass, and we tried to do some litter cover testing as well. And I also did that where I was looking at where there was sort of maximum regrowth going on in the farm site. And one of the reasons I did those 2 farm sites is to enable me to see if that grazing has an immediate impact on the bees I find where that has occurred, and also to kind of have a balance of the maximum and the minimum flowers that I might find in the field. My predictions for this research was that spatial and temporal patterns in floral abundance and species richness will drive the pollinator community structure, and that recent grazing will enhance the presence of ground nesting bees on all pastures because they're opening up those spots in the ground for bees to then nest in. And I did also, this sort of sounds contradictory, but I predict that if we get to a point where grazing intensity is heavier, this may actually reduce some of the overall bee abundance and diversity. So there might be a bit of a sweet spot of grazing intensity for bees. And finally, I do think that there may be some effect of honeybees on wild bees, but that is yet to be determined. So I'm going to show some very preliminary results, and I've been trying to update these, but I'm in the process of learning some of the statistical software. So you have to bear with me. I'm hoping I'll have some more stats for you soon, but these ones are just from year one, and they're just very basic stats, or very basic graphs I made from the means. And then I have one later that is a little more detailed statistically. So I did find more flowers in year one on the organic sites versus the non-organic sites, but this didn't translate to more abundance of the bees, which was interesting. And that's something I'm going to have to look at and how that plays out. I also tended to find more biomass on the organic farms versus the non-organic farms. And that was across the 3 sampling periods I did each summer. And again, I'm going to have to do further statistics to see if this holds for multiple years and what I actually get. Okay, so this is a graph that I was trying to make this week, and I apologize. I've got some work to do on how to make it pretty, but so there's some overlapping names here. But what I tried to do was use my categories and see if there were any groupings of some of the categories. So what I did was I put organic and non-organic, which came out on either side of the axes. And I also found edge and center, which also came out quite clear on both sides. And then I overlaid the the genus. So originally I tried to do all the species, but that became a very cluttered graph. So instead I did the genus groups. And yeah, so basically this is just to kind of start to look at where we might see some relationships. And I think some things that are interesting, I'm just going to go quadrant by quadrant because I don't want to over analyze anything at this time. The nearer something is to this center X point, the less it kind of like spreads out to any one of the categories that's highlighted in color. But I think where I'm interested in looking at is why some of these Colides down in the the right lower quadrant, Colides, Ogochloropsis, Apis, I know why, Stelis, Chelatosoma, why they're coming or why they're in the quadrant with organic. And again, we see a lot of diversity in the quadrant with edge, and I think that'll be really interesting to look at as well in further stats analysis. Okay, so something cool that I found, it doesn't say so much about the habitat quality or the factors involved with at the farm sites, but it is a very cool find. And this was found at an organic farm in Kincardine. It's a bilateral split of male and female. So what you can see in the picture is its face is sort of half of its face is male and half of its face is female. And that extends down the body, except for the fact that it has male genitalia. So this occurrence is very rare, but it seems to be a natural part of bee diversity. It is, however, the first ever species to be reported or occurrence of this for this species to be reported, and also for the subgroup Prospis itself. So it's Hylaeus modestus, and it's the first time that will be reported in the literature. And it's 8th ever for the genus Hylaeus. So it's kind of a cool find. And another cool thing that I was finding a lot of, which kind of prompted secondary questions in my research, is rarer bumblebees in the pastures. So on the left, we have Bombus pennsylvanicus, and on the right, it's Bombus turricula. And these bees are both pasture or meadow habitat bees. So I think that's why I'm finding higher numbers of them. But I think there'll be some interesting research I can do with that, looking at the sort of ratios of these bees to the other bees that I found, and comparing those ratios, which will standardize that for me, to other ratios of farmland. And then we can perhaps make some conclusions about the fact that maybe they're disappearing because the grasslands are disappearing. Okay, so I got into bumblebees, and bumblebees are interesting because bumblebees fly up to 5 kilometers, whereas some of those solitary bees that I showed pictures of earlier, they're only going to fly 100 to 250 meters, sometimes maybe up to 500 meters or so. But so bumblebees really have this larger flight distance, which means when I catch a bumblebee or when I sample from a bumblebee in a farm, I don't really know if its habitat is that farm or if it's just passing through and it's like, oh, that area looks cool, I want to go see what's there. So I started to wonder, like, how can I really get into figuring out, do these bumblebees come from these farms or not? And so this shows the bumblebee life cycle. So you have the queen E down here. The bumblebee is hibernating over winter. And when it comes out after winter, it gathers resources and it starts to build a hive, and it births all the workers. And then later it births all the males and the new queens. They mate, and then the new queen, which is called the gyne, goes into hibernation. And those new queens are the only ones that live over winter. So what this means is that all the worker bees, as well as the new queens, the gynes, and the males, they're all siblings. And so what I did was capture a bunch of workers, and then I looked for the relatedness of these workers. And the more related, the more number of bees that were related to each other, the higher likelihood that would be a nest at a site. Whereas if it's a singleton, I can't say that bee is, whether that bee is nesting at that site or just passing through. So, and then I did sample the queens from the next year, which would be the sisters of those earlier workers. So then I can look at, you know, how likely are the nests in that area, and how likely is the survivorship of those queens, or how well are the queens surviving over winter, which I think is pretty cool to be able to do. But yeah, so I'm still working on that. And so these are some pictures of dealing with the bee DNA, which is very much outside my my field, because I would classify myself as a field researcher first, but it was a really good opportunity to learn. So, oh, this is a little slow-mo of like some of the DNA work, but I think it's actually just it's not actually gonna show much, but okay, moving on. So my bumblebee DNA predictions are that the bumblebees will respond in part to larger landscape factors because of the flight distance that they can achieve, and also that improved nest densities and queen survivorship are expected where floral resources are greatest, and that shorter flight distance bees will respond to finer scale factors within the farm. And I think I saw that Bill Van Ness was in the group, and I'll give a shout out. I think this picture is from his farm. Okay, so in summary, wild bee biodiversity is very important. Pastures are hubs of bee biodiversity, and rotational management and other grassland practices may be able to help support bees in pastures. And we need to focus on growing diverse flowers and watching for bees in these locations to protect them. And I do believe that understanding bees in our pasture systems can help all ag systems when we think about landscape scale eco services and their provision. Okay, I think that's all I have today. I do sometimes throw on some suggestions. It might be a bit repetitive, but I could just go through them quickly. Some recommendations. Oh yeah, oops, yeah, periodic rotational grazing, but avoiding overgrazing, diverse forage flowering mixes, reduce disturbance at the field edges, because that's where we do find a lot of those bumblebees nesting. The general thing that we talk about with farmers is trying not to be too tidy especially at the edges, because the wildflowers, the scruffy areas allow for overwintering, but I know that's challenging when it comes to managing weeds. Watching for wild bees. I know some of my farmers do an excellent job of that already. And it's always awesome to go there and hear their stories of observing the bees on their farms. And finally, if you have very unproductive areas in the land, it could be a question of, can you actually save money by making some pollinator habitat there? Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was going to get to those slides. It's just something I sometimes do when I'm talking to producer groups.
That's great, Kyra. That was going to be one of my questions. What are some things that folks can be doing to help these pollinator populations? We'll open it up to see if there are any questions from the group here. Again, you can use the Q&A box.
Oh, there we go. Stop share. Sorry, my desktop is so messy. I've always got a lot going on.
Yeah, so feel free to either raise your hand or put a question in the Q&A box or here in the chat. But maybe I'll sort of kick it off here while folks form their questions. So what are some of the things you're most excited about kind of in this next phase of the work that you're working on, or what's coming next in your research?
Yeah, like it's been taking a very long time to do the identifications. It is a very slow process, and I'm really excited to get those wrapped up. I'm working pretty hard to get that wrapped up ASAP, and then I can do just the analysis. And I think there's a lot. I mean, I collected a lot of data, both in terms of questions from farmers and in the field, and it'll be kind of sorting out the relationships that are going on. And, like in that picture where I was saying that it was interesting to see that there's certain genus of bees that are sort of coming up, connected to the organic thing. I kind of want to know, like, if that's happening, why, and what's the reasoning behind that. And same with the edge, and same with the non-organic. So I'm really excited to delve into the research and figure out all the relationships that I can.
We've got some questions starting to come in here. So there's a question from David G on how can we reestablish more natural grasslands?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I have to say that I don't do a lot of work with reestablishment. I do think it's important work to be done, but I can't speak to that exactly. I would want to defer you to go to, a group that's working on that kind of work. Like I do believe Alice might be doing some of that work to give you more insight. I do have a colleague who's working on that, and I thought it would be very interesting if we can get our results, our data standardized to a point where we can compare the pasture and the she does work in remnants and reestablished native grasslands, and I thought it'd be really cool to do some comparisons there someday, but that takes some statistical expertise to figure out how to standardize all that as well. But yeah, so I feel poorly not being able to answer your question, but I'm not an expert on that, and I wouldn't want to give you bad information.
We've got a question coming in here from Patricia, sort of a two-part question. She's saying she wonders if a healthy wild bee population can be hard on new honeybees. And I think the question is being driven by the fact that she's had 3 different beekeepers try to establish honeybees on their farm and had some challenges.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I mean, that's an area of like growing research, and they have shown in the UK, there was a virus that transmitted from bumblebees to honeybees. So they know that there's viral transmission possible, but I don't think we've recorded that here. But yeah, there's issues around like resource, like sharing, but typically the research has actually seen that the honeybees tend to push the wild bees out of the resources or force them to work at different times of days. So the honeybees because honeybees tend to come in very vast numbers in a small space, the research that I have seen tends to be that it's the honeybees that kind of take over. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I mean, it's not impossible what you're asking at all. It just isn't what I see from the research on that.
Okay. We've got a question here. Would fire on grasslands endanger bee populations?
Yeah, there is research on this too. I think that the bee community shift after fire quite significantly because it's essentially regenerating the flowers it's like bringing back the immediate colonizers or whatever. So yeah, like it definitely can impact bees, but it definitely could impact bees in a negative way, but they do talk about colony shifts, not like obliteration, or sorry, community shifts, not obliteration, when they talk about that. But yeah, tough questions. I'm going to have to do some reading.
Another sort of two-part question here from Carolyn Young. Any interest in looking at cover crop diversity in organic, non-organic farms and pollinator diversity? And then kind of in connection to that, curious about pollinators and the connection to birds and other species that are at risk, like the bobolink.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, when I first started that we were talking about ways to do cover crop research and doing like multi-species cover crop comparison with bees. It is absolutely interest of mine, and it is absolutely something that we should be seeing research on. I do know a couple people in plant ag department who are doing that sort of as a subset question. I'm not sure what kind of research will come out of that, but yeah, definitely, absolutely, I'd be interested in doing that kind of work eventually. Yeah.
I'm gonna try and sneak one more in here. What is your opinion about the Armstrong and blackberry pollen bee nest? Do you think it's helpful for providing homes for wild bees?
Armstrong and blackberry. I actually am not familiar with those nests. Are we talking about the tunnel nests? Wooden tunnel?
The question was asked by April. I'm not sure if you're still here, April, and you want to join. It's a purple can, she says. They say.
Purple can. Okay, well, I have to be honest. I actually don't know that nest type. I know that there's mixed results with the bee nests, commercially made bee nests that tend to be like, it would be like series of bamboo sticks that are expected for bees to make nests in. And I do think they work to a certain extent, but the challenge is that there can be transmission of disease if they're not cleaned out properly. And if they're not there's some issues with it. So it's actually a point where there's a lot of research going on and people are kind of undecided if that's a good thing. But I unfortunately don't know about purple clans, but I will look into that.
Got it. Okay. And the last question, and then we'll close it out for today, is any recommendations on the best flowers to plant that help to attract bees on an organic farm?
Yeah, that's tough. So bees are interested in different flowers, and they also benefit from diversity of pollen. So I think that at this point, I can't tell you from my research exactly. I'm not there yet with my research to tell you what bees specifically, but definitely diversity and looking into the bees. Like I can give you the gardener's rundown of some bees that are good, but I think when it comes to like the larger scale farm management, yeah, it's sort of diversifying that seed mix for your pastures, and when you're looking at the flowers that do benefit bees. So we do have quite a big benefit from things like red clover to things like long tongue bees, but it shouldn't just be red clover, right? There should be diversity there. So yeah, again, I will have more information on this as I progress with my research, but yeah. And I think that if you're looking at sort of the garden type flowers, it's some of the native flowers. They're not coming. I've given a presentation on this. I have a slide somewhere, but they're not coming to mind right now, but you can, if you Google, there's a lot of local resources online, government resources, and high quality sort of local groups that deal with, I would go to them for recommendations over just any internet website, if that makes sense.
And if there's anything from a follow-up perspective here, we can get that, and then I'll post it in the Yorkshire Valley Farms exhibitor room so that folks that are interested can track that down. Maybe I'll get your 2 slides with the tips. We'll post those there for folks.
Yeah, I did give a presentation to a high school group where they were going to build a garden. And so I did have an entire list. So what I'll do is I'll just send that to you guys, and then you can post it online.
We can get it posted. Okay, great. Thank you to both Kyra and Michelle for sharing your knowledge with us today and what you're working on. Again, as part of the EcoScholar program, it's such a privilege to get a sneak peek into some of this work, and I'm really thankful to OCO and the Guelph Organic Conference for creating a forum here to be able to share that with the broader community. For anyone who's interested in understanding a little bit more about the EcoScholar program itself, you can head to the Yorkshire Valley Farms website. We're in the midst of the 2022 program, and applications have all been submitted, so we'll be announcing the recipients of the 2022 program around April of this year. And then with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sam from OCO.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you again for attending the session, and thank you to our speakers and sponsors, especially our session sponsor, Yorkshire Valley Farms. Now, please provide us with session feedback. I'm just going to post the session survey link in the chat, and it will also be provided in the Zoom follow-up email. This information helps to improve your experience at the Guelph Organic Conference. Our next session is Integrating Weed Management in Organic Production, happening tomorrow from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, please take advantage of the conference platform. You can go and check out the virtual trade show exhibit hall, where you can browse the virtual trade show booth profiles and chat with reps. Additionally, the website networking section under the groups tab, that's where you can make a room. There's a room set up for those who would like to discuss the session further. Yeah, and with that, I'm gonna wish you all a good day. Thanks for stopping by.